Hello, I'm Paul Whitkay. I founded the Alliance of Chief Executives. Welcome to our Alliance Roundtable on the future of health and healthcare. I love every opportunity to be able to hang out with amazing leaders who are making changes in the way we work and live. And I'm so excited today to have assembled an outstanding panel of leaders in the health and healthcare who are driving changes from drug discovery and diagnostics to healthcare policies and delivery of healthcare. We have so much to talk about that let's get right to meeting our panel. With that, Jeff, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jeff Margolis. I'm Senior Advisor to Blackstone for Healthcare and Information Technology. As well, I serve on 7 for-profit boards, including a couple public boards, Next Gen Healthcare and Alignment Healthcare.
Thank you. Maria.
I am delighted to be here. I'm Maria Frere. I'm the principal of the Frere Group. Previously, I was the president of the Foundation for the NIH, and I've had a long history of working in the public and private interface. I sit on the board of Biogen, Exelixis, Alexandria Real Estate, and Conexa.
Thank you. Freddie.
Hi, I'm Freddie Bowie. I'm the CFO of Icon Therapeutics. Unlike most CFOs, I'm actually a recovering chemist. And now I've spent the last couple decades in business and corporate development. Icon is an interesting company in that we apply advanced engineering and high performance computing to the problem of drug discovery and development. Look forward to speaking with you today.
Thank you. Mary.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here. I'm Mary Rosenman. I'm the CFO and CBO of InCitro. I also happen to be an organic chemist, chemical biologist by background. So InCitro is a drug discovery and development company using machine learning and data at scale to decode biology for transformative medicines. I also sit on the board of Tessera Therapeutics, which is pioneering gene writing in the genetic medicine space. And before these roles, I was a venture investor, a partner at McKinsey, and built another company, very exciting company that developed the first product for peanut allergy. So pleased to be here to talk about the future with everybody.
Thank you. Amir.
Hi, everybody. Amir Rubin. So great to be with you all. I serve as CEO at One Medical, which is a modernized primary care organization that combines in-person care and digital health. We are now part of Amazon. I've spent much of my career in healthcare systems. I was the CEO at Stanford University's health system and COO at UCLA's system, and also did a stint at Optum as executive vice president, and great to be here.
Thank you. Rachel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Harwitz. I'm the president and CEO of Caribou Bio. Caribou is a publicly traded CRISPR genome editing company, and we're developing off-the-shelf cell therapies for a variety of different cancer indications. I'm a PhD biochemist by training, and in fact, I did my graduate work with Jennifer Doudna as the very first student in her laboratory to work on CRISPR. She went on to win the Nobel Prize in 2020 in chemistry for CRISPR. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Matai.
Thank you, Paul. Such a pleasure to be here among a lot of friends. And my name is Matai Mammon. I'm the CEO and chairman of FUG Pharma in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a company that's working on a very exciting modality that I think can handle a broad swath of targets that today would be considered exceptionally challenging for traditional small molecules or antibodies. And then prior to that, I spent the last 5 or 6 years as running the research and development group at Johnson & Johnson's pharmaceutical side, Janssen. And prior to that, I was at Merck. And I started my career founding a company based on my thesis work called Theravance in the Bay Area.
And now last but not least, Ash.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on here with this amazing group of people. My name is Ash Zanuz. I'm the CEO of a healthcare technology company called Commure. I'm a radiologist by background and have spent the last couple of decades sort of living within academic medicine, healthcare policy, and technology. Really excited to be here and participate in this conversation.
So I think you can join me in just being excited about the amazing experience we got around the table. So we're going to go into just discussing what the future looks like. And I don't know if there's ever been a more exciting time with the tools we have available, the needs, the innovation, the combining of all these tools into just so much power to change the way we deliver health and invent new drugs and hopefully keep us more healthy. So I'm going to start off with Amir Rubin. Share what you think healthcare is going to look like 5 or plus years from now.
Well, great. Well, thank you. Gosh, big shoes here in front of this whole group, and to kick this off. So maybe I'll share some perspectives from the care delivery side of things. The only chemistry I know is like mixing cocktails, so I'll leave that to the experts on this panel. But I think a number of our future trends are here today, and we've seen them for a while. Some of the problems that we're facing in the industry, if you kind of look at a lot of the key stakeholders, you start with consumers, they tend to be dissatisfied with their experience, with access, with availability, affordability. If you look at those who are paying for healthcare, if you look at employers, for example, they're looking to recruit and retain and keep employees productive and then manage their costs. But that continues to be a challenge for employers. So you see these challenges, if you will, on the demand side of healthcare, consumers, employers, those who pay. Certainly we have the same in our governmental payers. How do we afford what we want to deliver to people? And how do we deliver it with high quality, high service experience? And then if you look on the supply side, you see challenges as well. On the physician and provider side, you see challenges with burnout, burdens of what I call the burdens of desktop medicine and dealing with electronic health records, the challenges in a reimbursement system that's largely piecemeal and production oriented. And then if you look at the broader kind of health networks and health ecosystems, you have health plans, health systems, hospitals, and they're trying to manage how to coordinate care and deliver outstanding specialty care in an era of rising labor costs, rising burnout, and some challenges coming out of the pandemic. So I think those are some of the problem statements we see in each of our stakeholder groups, but I think there's a lot of positivity in all of those. I think we are seeing models for consumers. How do you make it a better experience? How do you make access easier? How do we leverage technology? How do we have multimodal access, in-person, digital, synchronous, asynchronous? I think on the employer side, you have a bevy of startups that have been selling solutions to employers, and some here on this panel and many in the group here. I think from the supply side, if you think about clinicians, physicians, team members, really excited how we leverage technology to reduce workflow, to reduce some of those burdens of desktop medicine. We could talk more about that. And then on the health networks, how do we really develop integrated, but virtually integrated ecosystems, not necessarily vertically integrated, but more virtually, and how do we leverage flow of data? So I think we'll continue to see solutions along those. And then of course, there's always wild cards of government policy. I don't say that negatively, but that can make major shifts in how we think about things. And then, breakthroughs in technology, as many of the experts on the panel can tell us, we may have major breakthroughs in certain clinical conditions that change the way that we care for things. GLP-1s, somebody had to mention it, right? That's changing things. Obviously, as we think about generative AI, amazing technology, and as we'll hear, I'm sure, from Rachel and others, how one can leverage these CRISPR technologies, that can change the game. So there's always this exogenous technology change that might change the current themes, but it's a high level kickoff here.
All right. Well, thank you. So Rachel, you had exciting things going on from very advent of Caribou. Bring us up to date on your vision, not necessarily what you're doing right today, but how do you see the future of health and healthcare now?
Certainly. So my hope, my expectation is that the next, let's call it 5 to 10 years, patients have access to 3 fundamental modalities of medicines, whereas today it's really 2, right? Most physicians are going to be able to prescribe some sort of small molecule, some sort of chemical compound, or maybe an antibody or some other kind of protein therapeutic. Each of these strategies fundamentally treats a disease by trying to interfere with the function of a protein or maybe multiple proteins inside of cells that are doing something that is harmful. But wouldn't it be fantastic if you could get rid of ever making that harmful protein in the first place, or be able to create the right version of the protein instead? And so I think that's really the opening into what I'll call the field of genetic medicines, and the ability to therapeutically intervene directly at the genetic level. Now, that could be at the DNA level, it could be at the RNA level. There is a growing toolbox of many different kinds of technologies that can do this, that I think is super interesting and super exciting. There are a few of these on the commercial marketplace today already. There are a handful of gene therapies for very specific rare diseases. There are also a handful of cell therapies that are available to certain kinds of cancer patients that have really allowed people to retool how the immune system can be directly harnessed to create therapeutic products to fight cancer and potentially other diseases. So Paul, as I look forward, I'm cautiously optimistic that this field will be wildly successful in the next several years, really broadening the kinds of therapeutic approaches that patients have access to in ways that we can intervene perhaps earlier in the disease or more fundamentally in the mechanism of the disease.
All right. Well, thank you. And speaking of huge quantities of data and proteins, Freddie, what do you see for the future?
So a couple things. I think building off some of the themes from Rachel and Amir, certainly as I, look out over the next 5 to 10 years, I think we'll see, really new models of research and development driving novel therapies in biotech. And I think what we're now seeing, certainly through the introduction of better tools to understand the underlying biological processes, because in general in biotech, it's a miracle anytime we develop a drug because we actually don't know what the disease state is. It's an absolute miracle. And I think, there are a lot of companies certainly building better tools so we can actually have, more precise understandings of signaling pathways and mechanisms that understand the disease state so we can intervene with the right therapy at the right time. And so I think over the next 5 to 10 years, what you'll see is new models of R&D that allow us to build tools that allow us to peer into biology at its fundamental level, and then develop, novel therapies. Certainly in oncology, that's been, sort of tip of the spear for some of the precision medicine tools. But I think you're now seeing that broadly across in immunology and neurological disorders. And I think more and more biotech and pharma will adopt these novel models, in large part powered by, novel software tools, and bringing teams together that can take different approaches to drug discovery, which has had, difficulties with productivity in developing drugs that actually perform well in the clinic.
All right. Well, thank you. Going down the path of more data and computational health, Mary, give us your thoughts on the future.
Thanks, Paul. I was hoping I would be next because I fully agree with everything that's been said, and building on Freddie's comments. I mean, the future that I envision and that we envision at InCitro is really one where we can make predictions about which therapeutic will be safe and effective in which patient. And I think as we sit here today in 2023, that still sounds like it's crazy. Like, I'm just going to look at this person and I'm just going to magically figure out whether or not this drug is going to work in them. That's crazy because we as an industry are routinely seeing, 60 to 70% success rates at most in phase 3 trials, right? We have all of these failures. For me, the reason it isn't crazy is because if you sort of go backwards, at least in my own experience, if I may for a second, 4 years ago, I was approached by a company that was claiming to be developing AI in pharma. And at that time, having grown up in a very, let's say, conservative drug discovery and development path, I said that sounded like a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it wasn't going to be possible. And it just sounded, frankly, like people were making stuff up. And as I engaged with in that particular conversation, I actually couldn't develop conviction around what they were doing. But I started reading books and reading papers and talking to everybody that I possibly could. And the picture that emerged for me was one of the centrality of genetics. The genetic data was there and had been there for a really, really long time, but that we weren't actually using all of the other data that existed around the genetics to understand, to actually have statistical power to make predictions about what the right genetic points of intervention were going to be in a particular disease. So I think where we are today, just 4 years later, we're actually starting to get there. First of all, we as an industry now no longer do we have people saying, oh, computational approaches, machine learning are smoke and mirrors, because there are now dozens and dozens of high quality companies, and even more if you sort of lower the bar, who are applying computational approaches at every piece of the value chain. There are lots of companies that are trying to use data and compute to discover better targets. Even more companies, probably the majority, deploying computational methods on the back, by the way, of physics-based methods like docking that have been around forever, but now being combined with machine learning to develop better therapeutic matter, mostly small molecules, but eventually probably moving into the direction that Rachel is working in. And you have a number of companies as well that are using these technologies to develop computational biomarkers for patient selection for trials. The first two areas, the first and the third area, using compute to develop targets and using compute to run better trials, are very nascent. You have a ton of activity in the middle. But where are we going to be in 5 to 10 years? I absolutely hope that in 5 to 10 years, we are in a world where we are harnessing genetic data and vast amounts of the multimodal data that exists for all patients and for all of us to build predictive models that help us actually understand an embedding state of a machine learning model that helps us understand what is driving this disease, and therefore what is the genetic point of intervention that's correct, and what is the right, whether or not a patient is actually a fit for that genetic intervention on the basis of their state and their position in that sort of complex manifold or embedding of disease. So it sounds crazy to say we're moving towards a future where we're going to make predictions around which therapy is going to be safe and effective in which patient. And we're certainly not going to get there overnight, but I think we're going to continue. We've already seen incremental progress. We're going to continue to see it, and that's incredibly exciting.
Very cool. Thank you. Jeff, what's your perspective?
Well, as I hit my 40th year in this industry, I guess I'm kind of known for being systematic and a little bit of a contrarian in terms of, I get excited about everything being said, and I agree with a lot of it, actually. It's just that I've heard it all before. And if you went into a session, in 1988 about the future of healthcare, people would be talking largely about the same problems they are today, and they'd be talking about technology and biotech and the use of data and the application of data and so on and so forth. And so I'm going to give 3 kind of predictions about what I think will happen over the next 10 years, that some of them support what's being said here, and some of them sort of challenge not so much the ideas, but whether the investments being made to some of these things make any sense at all. And let's start with the first point before I make the prediction, that we're in a major affordability crisis in healthcare. Everyone forgets that, and everyone thinks that they're going to develop some freaking blockbuster that somehow is going to get paid for, that's going to return massive benefits both to society and to investors, right? And if you add up all those promises, it's bigger than the GDP of the entire globe. So can't be true, can it? Prediction one is that stems from the fact that benefits rule all, not science. So it's the benefit plans that come through employer-based insurance, through Medicare and through Medicaid, and the construction of those benefit plans that provide the overall layer to enable access to any of these things that we're talking about. Only 20% of what drives health is genetics and clinical work. 80% is lifestyle and environment. Only 20%, I repeat. So what you're going to see is benefit plans that work on 5 pillars of health, not just the sick care element of clinical care, but also mental health, social health, financial health, and helping people understand purpose, because those 4 things, in addition to clinical care, have a bigger impact on healthcare than than everything else we're talking about. And so you'll see a lot of innovation on benefits design across both the government plans and across the employer plans. Second prediction, and I love the discussion. I also am not a scientist. Well, I'm a systems scientist, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a chemist. But I'll tell you that we keep talking about genetics and genomics, but there's a lot of omics, okay? There's just not the human genome, DNA, and the human genome, RNA, right? But there's proteomics, and there's microbiomics, what's in your gut, and there's glucomics, right? And so to date, there hasn't been a way to platform those types of big data together. And my prediction is the other omics up against the genome will become a replacement for the electronic health record in describing the human being. That's a big prediction. I'm going to say it again. But the human genome with the other omics will become a replacement for the basic biometrics that we see in EHRs today, which we've pretty much exhausted what we can do, even though pharma gets excited about attaching what they call real world data, which is a really stupid term to those of us who have been working in real world data for the last 40 years. But attaching that is not a novel concept. Multi-omics. The last thing that I'll predict is an AI, which is highly overhyped and overblown, and most people who are investing in it right now are going to get blown out. But where AI is going to matter is in what I call 2-axis personalization. And this does highly supportive of what the people here are saying on the panel so far. There is a clinical access of personalization that gets to precision medicine and to understanding the person. There's another access, which is understanding them in their daily living and as a human being in their social situation with their social determinants and so forth. Well, if Amazon can predict better than you can when you need new toilet paper or when you need to order toothpaste and they know which brand to send you, trust me, we can use big data and AI to drive the right kind of programming and therapies to support daily living and clinical things to human beings over the next decade. And a lot of people on this call, my co-panelists, are going to be the ones to help drive that, which is exciting. Thanks.
Jeff, you just demonstrated exactly why I believe in bringing diverse perspectives together to really look at it from a holistic point of view, because the technology is moving fast. So thank you for your perspectives.
My kids and grandkids find me exhausting, by the way. So, bye.
So, well, that's great. If you can exhaust your grandchildren before they exhaust you, that's good genes. So let's see here. Let's go to Maria.
Well, so, tough act to follow, Jeff, but I view the world in 3 different spaces. One is the state of science. Second is structure and practice and how we go about doing what we do every day. And policy, not to mention politics, which Amir already mentioned earlier today, which is going to become very important in the next couple of years. So from the scientific perspective, I think we all feel the excitement, Paul, that you articulated. And like others in the call today, I'm very, very bullish about what's happening in biology and what's happening in medicine. The pace of change, the pace of innovation, the reduction to practice is truly unprecedented, and particularly the marriage that we've already been speaking about of AI, biology, and medicine. So we've spoken about precision medicine, personalized medicine, and Rachel, you're talking about genetic medicine. I want to throw another term, which is bespoke, and the way that we will end up with some bespoke platforms that will have an impact on diseases that have common pathways. And I think we're going to see a lot of that, in particular, 3 areas, which have already been mentioned: gene and cell therapy, digital biomarkers, and of course, data mining. The gene and cell therapies, because we will be able to tackle diseases that affect either very small or very large populations. And because, and I think this is critical, there is keen interest from the regulators to move these interventions forwards, which I haven't seen until very recently. So this is very exciting. I think digital biomarkers will make great inroads. It's already been touched upon, but I see them as coming into their own, particularly in clinical trials, increasing and enhancing our ability to select participants, and whether or not to determine where we're meeting the endpoints. And anything we can do that can reduce the time and the expense of clinical trials will serve us very well. And finally, the mining of data. We've been collecting, as has already been said before, and continue to collect millions upon millions of data points of information. And we're not very good at mining that information, mostly because it's not very well curated. It's not normalized, but I think we will see a change in that in the next few years, and it's going to be critically important. And in particular, I'd like to see more analysis and more data in sex-based differences. I think there's a lot of information out there, and we have not tapped that. We've been doing clinical trials, and we've now have to collect data in the different sex-based information, but we have not seen any of that. And I think we're going to be seeing that in the next few years. From a structural point of view, my sense is we will see more partnerships, particularly in the pre-competitive stage, because we need to lower the hurdles for entry for some of these areas of science. And we've seen the public and the private sector work together very well. COVID was an excellent example. My sense is that we will see a third very important component of that, which is the patients. And the role of patients as advocates, as representation in trials, and as funding sources will increase in the next few years. And finally, I spoke about policy. I think we're going to have new leadership at NIH. We will, of course, have a big election coming up. And my sense, to paraphrase Amir and his access, availability, and affordability of medicines, this will be, as Jeff mentioned, a very, very critical component of what we will be seeing in the next 5-10 years. We haven't been particularly well at articulating how we tackle these issues from a benefit to the patient. And yes, we have to handle the issue of how these interventions are paid for. So I think that will dominate a lot of the conversation. But by and large, I think I see a very exciting few years coming along, and I can't wait to be part of it. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Maria. Ash, what's your perspectives? You've got quite a varied background, from starting as a physician and still being a physician. What do you think, Ash?
Look, I think a lot of folks on here have said a lot of things I'm going to say, but I definitely agree, and I agree with a lot of things that have been said, but I have to, I'm going to piggyback on what Jeff said. I think definitely health plans are where we're going to see a lot of changes in the next 5 years. And to double click on that, I think if you look at the last decade, at the population, the over 65 population makes up about 16% of the US population, but I think accounts for more than like a third of healthcare spending. And that cost is only going up. As the aging population increases, the costs are going up. Medicare is feeling the pinch. And so I think, that will drive a lot of change. Yes, we've heard a lot about consumerism before. We've heard, COVID has really impacted adoption of especially telemedicine, et cetera. But I think, to be realistic, things change when there's an impact on the financial stability and capabilities in this country. And so that is going to drive a lot of change, in my opinion. And that coupled with rapid adoption of technology. Yes, there's like basic technology that's getting adopted now in healthcare, but generative AI, I would say before January was hocus pocus for most people. And now with, ChatGPT and Claude and all these other like tools becoming more mainstream and people understanding how easy it is to use, I'm actually seeing a lot of excitement in health systems and payers and how they're taking this up. And, regulators may get in the middle and maybe there'll be a little bit of slowdown, but I think there's a huge shift in how people see the value of this technology. So if you couple the increasing spend because of the aging population and the rapid adoption of technology, I think that will drive a lot of change in the next 5 years. And I think the focus will be mainly on the health plan side, driving a lot of this change. They're going to come front and center, becoming sort of like the thought leaders to drive change. So specifically, I think government health plans, Medicare is going to take center stage as these populations increase. So we're going to start seeing changes with Medicare Advantage enrollment. And so health plans need to start thinking about how to provide more comprehensive options. Healthcare spending by older adults generally is going to continue to increase. So they have to think about preventative care, like others have said here, and chronic disease management. I couldn't agree more with, I think that was Jeff who pointed out 80% is lifestyle. So there's going to be, it's been a lot of talk about social determinants of health, but now there's going to be a lot of focus on this stuff because it's actually going to increase spending, and they have to pay attention to it. Otherwise, Medicare will go bankrupt. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus there. It's also going to drive a shift into the home. We've been talking about it, we've been seeing it, but there hasn't been, the reimbursements have lagged in this space, but we're going to start seeing change. And I don't mean just, care in the home. Like there's going to be more adoption of telehealth and more remote patient monitoring for the less acute conditions. But we're going to start seeing a lot more shift in thinking about post-acute care and acute care management. So, how there's reimbursement in these models. These tend to be less expensive when it goes into the home. And there is data starting to show that it's actually improved care. So I think we're going to start seeing new models, probably experimental in the beginning, but it'll start to emerge over the next 5 to 10 years. I think everybody talked about data and analytics, so I'm going to skip that. The other thing I'm going to highlight is, again, going back to the plans, if you look at the administrative burden, we've all talked about it, but with the adoption of technology, specifically generative AI, we're going to see rapid adoption in decreasing the administrative burden, both on the plan side and on the provider side. And I'm sure on the clinical trials and management side, on the life sciences component, when you talk to plans, the highlight is they spend about $100 per person, per member per month on caring for these administrative costs. And that's really expensive. And as the spending increases, and you're going to see a lot more focus on decreasing that burden to less than $80 of per member per month here, or more. Let's see where it goes. But I'm actually bullish on the administrative burden taking front and center before clinical and clinical trials, et cetera, coming. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on getting health plans, large providers, small mom and pop shops, everybody's going to get bombarded with a lot of tools over the next couple of years on reducing the administrative burden and having more financial stability and revenue intelligence, to get them more stable. So I expect to see a lot of solutions come to market. Let's see which one stays and which one dies, but I'm really excited about what's coming.
Thank you. Thank you. And batting cleanup, we have Matai. Matai, you want to end up the visions before we get into the discussion?
Sure. A lot has been said, and I'm thinking about how to complement it or emphasize a piece that I feel particularly passionate about. I think the one I feel particularly passionate about that's been touched on, but let me try a different perspective on it, is this notion of precision. So, coming at it from a strictly medical perspective for a moment, something that bothers me about the entire biopharmaceutical industry and how medicine works right now is that the majority of medicines, and I would say more than 50%, are used in people that don't benefit and may just have side effects, and or where the effects aren't durable. It should bother all of us because there's money being made on those prescriptions, and payers pay good money, governments pay good money to reimburse, and they don't do anything for the patient, and they may do harm. That should be a motivating problem for this notion of precision medicine. The problem is, if you look at what precision medicine is, what is it? Like, we would all say it's kind of obvious that we'd want to understand the root cause of a disease and treat it. So, precision medicine today is restricted to 3 areas. It's true for virology, where the identity of a causing virus like HIV or influenza, and you try to treat it. Interestingly, just to contrast it before I go where it is a thing, it's not a thing in the other giant branch of infectious disease, in bacteriology. Like, you never identify an organism typically before you treat, and you're treating anatomically. You're treating pneumonia, or you're treating skin and skin structure infection. So this is like an interesting thing. Viruses were a modern discovery. Bacteria are a long time ago. And you don't have ways of describing things mechanistically in bacterial disease that's used in much of the world right now. So just where else is it a thing? It's become a thing in oncology, in certain aspects of oncology where there are known mutations that drive certain tumors. It's not a thing in immuno-oncology at all, in contrast. It is a thing in certain rare diseases that you're born with. It's known what the cause is of that, but it's not known in most rare diseases. Like pulmonary hypertension is an area where there is no known genetic or driver or mechanism that's underlying it, and it's a phenomenon that you're describing. So I'm saying these things because we talk about precision medicine as a goal. And I'm really hoping and counting on in the next 10 years that there's more progress made in precision medicine, but it's not at all an easy goal. The attempts that I've seen to use other data streams don't cut the disease sharply. That's problem number one. Like, if you have Crohn's disease as an example, there's no data stream that I've seen so far that cuts it 100. Like, you are definitely going to be a responder. You're definitely not going to be a responder. There are data sets that say you're more likely or less likely, but it's not as clean as having HIV. Like, if if you have HIV, you clearly have HIV, and there's not really like a chance of not responding, or people that don't have HIV will respond to HIV medicines. So I'm just pointing out that it's really hard. Furthermore, I have a practical, or I think we should head towards a practical precision, because at least a pharma perspective right now, which I think the biotech community largely hasn't embraced, at least located in the United States, is that the globe is definitely growing. Most of the growth of a pharmaceuticals companies, major pharmaceutical companies business, the growth drivers are largely ex-US. And so, seriously thinking through how South Korea is going to use your medicine, or where is Brazil in their health system, and understand how that's going to be, it's very important. So when you come to that, where price points are lower, then practical precision will be very, very important. So I'm favoring data streams that are collected that are very rich every day, like the images that come out of histopathology or the macro images that come out of other kinds of imaging systems, ECGs. These kinds of data streams are extraordinarily rich, and I favor them more in the next 10 years than specialized diagnostics that are molecular. A point to leave you with here is that we think of sequencing, like if any of us in major medical centers were unfortunate enough to get cancer, we're going to have our tumors likely sequenced. We're going to have the right panels taken. But if you're like 80% of American citizens right now are residents, you don't get your tumors sequenced, and it's not a thing. So, for example, my old team tried to make it a thing to infer genetic mutations from histopath images using machine learning methods. Like, that's a very practical, very inexpensive kind of precision that we all need. As the world becomes, large in terms of commercial regions that are important, sick people obviously are everywhere. Cost of goods and cost of getting to precision, this practical precision, we just need to pay attention to right from the beginning of discovering a drug. So I'll leave it there. The precision medicine is a very important goal, but is an extremely challenging goal, especially if you overlay pragmatism.
All right. Well, thank you, the panel. I mean, I'm blown away by the healthcare industry. In my observations, I get to work with CEOs in every industry, and it's probably the most extreme science and innovation going on, and innovation's going on everywhere, extreme costs, and extreme complexity. So let's go right into the question. We've got some great questions to address. I'm going to start with Dirk Schappeler. You asked, you made the observation that technology appears to be moving at 2 orders of magnitude faster than the regulatory and policy environment. So how do you think this will play out? I don't need to hear from everybody, but just jump in on who might like to answer that one.
So help me understand, Dirk, a little bit more what your thoughts are here.
Hi, Maria, this is Dirk. So when you look at when OpenAI and other companies launched ChatGPT and other tools a few months ago, only not even a year ago, and what impact it had on education, on consumer products, and many other applications, it seems like it's moving with lightning speed. It's hard to keep up, actually. But when you look at the most suitable applications that have a lot of data, which is in healthcare, I worked myself in pharmaceuticals for several years. Then you would think, well, the biggest use case must be in those applications. But there is questions about, can this be used in a secure way? You hear about all these things where the ChatGPT thing has bias and so on. So how can you use this technology and take advantage of it, but at the same time not endanger patients and the healthcare system? I mean, I don't have the answer. That's why I'm asking smart people in this call. So it might be a tough one, but would love to hear your opinion about it at least.
Well, then you're not getting an answer from the smartest person in the room on this issue, but I will say this, and I think others can perhaps be more instructive. I thought that's where you were going on this issue. Having been in the government, having been at NIH, and having worked in this intersection between the public and the private sector, this is a very complicated subject, particularly in the United States, where privacy and the right of ownership of your own data is a very big issue. I don't know exactly how we're going to move forward on this. I know there's a lot of policy, as Paul just mentioned, to tackle this issue. But we're learning as we go along, let's put it that way. And this is, in fact, interestingly enough, where I see an important role for the patient groups. It's been very interesting in my career seeing how the patients themselves are sometimes much less conservative than the regulators and the governments are. And we've seen that over and over again, particularly when it came to clinical trials, particularly when it came to the use of their data. They want to be part and parcel of the equation. So my sense is that we might see some evolution and intervention there coming from that angle. But I welcome other perspectives. Jeff, yeah.
The reason I didn't answer initially is I thought you were asking a regulatory question versus an information technology question, which is really the question I hear you asking is about the application of these super fast moving technologies, right? And so again, I'll say some things that people may find interesting or may not agree with, but you know, I am an information technologist and I am an information scientist by training, right? And so when everyone gets really excited about the application of large language models or AI to a set of data, but what really matters is the set of data and the sources of that data. Okay, so let's see here, for the sake of humor, but also truth. The highest graduate in a medical school class is called doctor. What is the last graduate called with the worst grades? Doctor. And so if you feed a tool with lots and lots of data, I think probably everyone's taken enough statistics here to know what will happen is you'll regress to the mean. Okay, so if you took writing samples from 1,000 people, you're not going to get the best writer. You're going to get the mean in terms of how the algorithm chews things up, because it's chewing up data. So I think what we have to do in the industry is go back to basics and remember that garbage in, garbage out, which has always been the issue in information technology, whether it's algorithms and going back to procedural programming and predictive modeling over the last few decades, or now, is that the quality of the data sources and the uniqueness of the data sources that feed the tools are going to be the key to what comes out of the tools. The tools themselves are not going to supersede the inputs.
Okay.
Just one point, Paul, just
Yep.
as I'm not going to speak to the larger question here, but just one thing about the intersection of privacy and newer AI tools is, you know, the medical systems right now have depended a lot on certain systems for de-identification. Like if you want a way to aggregate data and understand some principle of a population, you use these de-identification algorithms. Or you de-identify in certain ways that are resistant to identification. But that is getting philosophically perhaps harder and harder and harder. There's more and more ability to kind of infer identity from less and less data by recognition of you know, not even human recognizable subtle patterns. And so that is a thing that we're going to have to continue to build up and use AI tools that resist other AI tools if we want to maintain this notion of privacy as we give lots of data through the medical system, whether for pharmaceutical clinical trial or lots of other uses of clinical data that are used right now.
But I also make a quick point on this. I've spent a little bit of time working in the Senate and also close to a decade serving as a subject matter expert on the House and Senate side. And I will just not, and I love that process, but generally what I found is our system is still reactive and not proactive. So the only comment I'll make is it's incumbent on all of us working in the industry, both on the health system side that is participating in these trials, as well as like those of us in the lab and, you know, in the pharmaceutical companies, to think of the downstream effects of any of the AI components that we're bringing to bear to ensure that we're accounting for things like, bias or, disparity, et cetera. We're thinking ahead. It's got to be more intentional upfront, because if we're thinking that regulatory components will either hinder or block, usually those things come after something has gone wrong, at least from my experience. There's, unless all of us are participating in the process where we're going to the Hill and we're educating them about the possible negative implications of generative AI and other tools that are coming into play, it is not the first thing that's top of mind for healthcare. There's just broader implications that that Congress is thinking about across what this means for everybody, not just for healthcare. And so this is very specialized, like Paul said, and complex. So at least from my opinion, it's all of us on this call that have to be thinking about it, writing about it, speaking about it, and driving the change and participating and driving and showing the use cases and thinking of like potential downstream effects rather than regulatory. So just my 2 cents.
So I'm going to ask a related question that basically came in for both Lori Hawkins in Australia as well as Chris Hornick here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and talking about the affordability, particularly here in the U.S., where U.S. is consistently ranked among the worst for affordability of healthcare versus the performance. And how do we see that? What's the key to actually changing that equation in the coming years? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, I'll start just by saying everyone likes to write that stuff. My first book was actually partially about that topic, Paul. But if you add up the medical, what we call healthcare spend and what we call social spend across what we would call first world countries around the world, if you add the two numbers as a percentage of GDP together, they're almost always equal. In other words, the US has a much higher healthcare spend. It has a lower social spend as a percentage of GDP. But if you take those two components across all the countries of the world. So this is about how you shift dollars between the definition of what we call healthcare and how we support people in their daily living. I'll start with that one.
So let's reverse the question a little bit. We all like to increase performance and better health for less money. What's the biggest drivers on that we see? Because there's lots of different innovation on all aspects of healthcare that I'm seeing. I'm going to go to you, Amir. Because you have a platform for delivering health proactively and reactively. What are your thoughts? What would might be the biggest drivers to impact that equation?
Yeah, thank you. Well, certainly from, I'll call it the One Medical or primary care perspective, I think we're doing a few things that we've demonstrated can help drive down the cost of care. We had a paper published about 18 months ago in JAMA Network Open that showed for one employer, we took down their cost 45%. That's quite something. And we have other case studies, 8 to 10%. And so what is it we're doing? Well, we have really frictionless, easy access to primary care. So if you want to message your provider, you want to have a video chat, the cost at the margin is $0. There is no limit on how many times you can do that. And if you want an appointment, you can have one today or tomorrow. And when you have that appointment, your provider's time in clinic is 30 minutes. So they have time to deal with specialty care, and they're not paid a fee for service. They're paid a salary. And so through these underlying effects, we've shown in that JAMA study, 20, 30, 40, 50% reductions in RX usage, in ER visits, and specialty usage and hospitalizations. Why? Reduce the frictions to primary care and reduce the friction on the provider to dealing with upstream issues. So, and a little bit to some of the statistics that Jeff was sharing, which I concur with. If you look in the US, we spend about 3 to 5% of the premium dollar on primary care versus other OECD nations. We spend about 10%, and it's not just spend, but so I certainly have seen in our model, if you can make it more accessible for more people. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a great study out of Michigan multiple decades ago, talked about the 5 A's of access, accessibility, affordability, affability, et cetera. we can reduce a lot of downstream spend without even touching the specialty networks, which is what we've seen at One Medical on the commercial population. And certainly in the senior population, we have close to half of seniors now in Medicare risk, Medicare Advantage programs, and all the idiosyncrasies of risk adjustment factors and reimbursement and policies aside, we have seen that those models, and we've seen this in our own organization, can reduce the cost of care and deliver high quality and service levels. I don't think there's any one magic reimbursement method. I think the bigger magic is however the system gets reimbursed. In our model, again, in that risk-based approach, our providers are on straight salary, longer appointment. We don't have any incentives on our physicians. There's no quality bonuses, services bonus, referral bonuses. We have all these metrics. We look at them, and if people don't believe in them, then we try to improve them, or it might not be a good fit. But so I think by designing the right access to affordable, accessible primary care, by having the right clinician time, workflows, incentives, I think there's a lot of progress we can make there. And of course, we can leverage a lot of digital approaches now, remote care, virtual care, workflow support as well.
All right. Other thoughts? Matai, you've been around the industry for a while, and you've seen it from your own biotech to Johnson & Johnson that delivers a lot of healthcare products. So what do you think? What might be the biggest driver to really drive down that, affordability and cost per performance?
Yeah, I like Amir's comments a lot. Like there's a lot that Amir and One Medical and that category of approach I think will address. One thing I guess that maybe to add is if you look practically at a patient that is sick in some way and then eventually comes to a treatment, there's a gap in time there where a lot of time and energy is spent, sometimes productively, sometimes not, on diagnosing what's wrong with that person. And there's a lot of tests ordered, a lot of things done, sometimes in an expensive setting, like in a hospital. And I do see like room for advances, big advances in non-interventional imaging, or a liquid biopsy, like drops of blood that actually do point towards what's wrong with the person. There's a lot of misdiagnosis right now where you never figure out what's wrong with the person or point to the wrong condition. These lead to tons of churn in the system, and you have bad treatment as a result, or no treatment, but lots and lots of investigation. That's a big part of medicine right now, and that's not a US specific problem, and that's really comes from a knowledge and our available tools for how to assess what's wrong.
Okay, anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I think we also have to make a difference between chronic, catastrophic, and catastrophic diseases, right? In the United States, we're very, very good at treating cancers, for example. I think Matai mentioned earlier the fact that if you go to a major medical center, you will get, and I can tell you that being a cancer survivor, I knew exactly where my cancer mutation was. It was pinpointed directly to the actual mutation. But what we have is a very different situation in community services and in community hospitals, and particularly in geographic areas. So I think one of the things we have to be careful is when we talk about the affordability and the availability of treatment, it's a very different situation when you have a mental illness, which Jeff mentioned earlier. You have Alzheimer's or congestive heart failure, which is something that's going to be degenerative. And I think the way we respond to medical treatment is very different, and it will also depend on what the kind of disease that we're facing.
All right, let's go back to go ahead.
Just one quick principle, given the technology backgrounds of what everyone's doing here, is I have this saying I always explain: Digital first, virtual second, physical third is the way you're going to save money in the system. And everyone thinks virtual is digital. What we're doing here right now is happening at the speed of people. We're using digital technology to accomplish it, but this is happening at the speed of people. Digital technology will take the things that can be done to save time and create efficiencies. It will insert it into the workflow. It will do the triaging and the sorts of things. And given the rising cost of labor, the rising cost of physicians, the rising cost of clinicians, the only way you're going to actually take macro cost out of the whole system, and I agree with Amir's view of primary care, is a great way to do it for the populations that have access to that. But if you're going to take out cost in total, you've got to shift, 5, 10, 15% to digital.
You're starting to sound like a fan of digital transformation now. So thank you, Jeff. Let's move on to drug discovery question. Bassem Al-Famawi has asked about, you made the observation that genetic data we have is not diverse enough. And the reason we don't have proper approach to drug discovery or preventative medicine. And we're also missing other data points such as preomics and transcriptomics. And how do you guys see all these elements coming together to create better outcomes and better medicines? Rachel, you've been working in this area for a while.
Sure. I mean, I have to start by agreeing, right? There's so much more data that we would benefit from as a community of drug developers. Having many more genomes sequenced of people who are from many more backgrounds would be incredibly helpful. There are all kinds of things above and beyond that are incredibly useful as well. And I'd say there's still key technology bottlenecks to accessing or even creating some of these kinds of very large scale omics data sets. One of the other hats I wear beyond my role at Caribou is I sit on the board of a publicly traded company called Seer, and they're developing a proteomics technology platform with really the vision of doing unbiased proteomics. Today, it's pretty hard to do a very large scale proteomics data set that could match a genomics data set. And yet I think that's a really important part of being able to ask and answer some of these drug discovery and drug development questions. And so I'm really excited about the work they're doing and the products they've developed to really enable a lot of this work. There are so many layers to this. I think trying to understand which data points might be helpful in terms of understanding why certain patients respond, why other patients don't, but then ultimately what to do with that information. And Matai, I think, made a really excellent point that I'd like to come back to and maybe pose a question to some of my co-panelists here. With the example of HIV, you have HIV or you don't, and it's very clear which regimen of drugs you should or should not receive. In the case of so many other diseases, we're going to have data that says you have high likelihood of responding to this drug or low likelihood of responding to this drug. And at a population level, it's very easy to draw some boundaries around that and say what recommendations would look like. We don't practice medicine on a population level. Decisions are made. If it were my loved one, or if it were me, and there were even a low likelihood of a drug working that could have a profound positive impact on my disease, gosh, I'm going to want to take that. And that's inconsistent with how you might think about using these data sets at a population scale. So I'd be curious from some of my co-panelists to hear how they're thinking about wrestling between population level decision-making and N of 1 level decision-making.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on all of those things. So this is a great question. So let me first go back to the big question which was asked, and then Rachel, I'll come back to yours. How do we get from population to sort of specific incisive decision making? So at the higher level, when I spoke earlier, I talked about sort of genetics being this foundational modality, and then using all of the other broader sets of data to build an integrated model where we understand the patient. When Jeff spoke, he characterized what I put in that other bucket when he talked about the other omics data that's actually coming up with the help of companies like Seer and SomaLogic on the proteomic side and many, many others. Ultimately, what's happening in the broader revolution around generative AI and the reliance on large language models is that those models run on text. As an industry, we do not have models today that are high quality foundation models for biology, for biologic state, for medicine. We don't have those models today because we don't have data at the sufficient quality and scale to build those models. We're getting there, and we're going to get there soonest on modalities that are being generated in the most consistent way and have sufficient depth in the data to actually allow us to build those predictive models. The reason you can't build that model on genetics is not because you don't have enough genetics, it's because you don't have enough density and depth in the data. So the area where I think we're going to see that kind of thing first is most likely in histopathology. There are companies doing this on cellular morphology data, on cellular imaging data. We're going to see it in histopathology because there's enough density in the data on the one hand, and on the other hand, you're actually getting very, very close to what's happening in the disease, what is actually happening in the tumor microenvironment. So we're working towards the area, towards that place where we have foundation models, and they're not going to be large language models, okay? They're going to be medium language models. Right now, they're small language models, but they're going to have predictive power in terms of differentiating patients from one another in what I sort of previously characterized as this broad embedding state. Rachel asks a great question. How is it that you make the connection between a modality that's collected broadly for people and something that's actionable on the other end? We spend a lot of our time, disproportionate amount of our time, wrestling with exactly that question. And I'll give you an example of something that we presented broadly, which is looking at these embeddings to understand the relationship between histopathology on the one hand and a tax-seek, a term known to you and probably 20% of people on this call, Rachel. It has to do with how open or closed the chromatin is of a given patient, right? You probably agree with me that a tax-seek data is actionable. It actually tells you in this patient, this gene is open, therefore this protein is being produced. Now, the positive predictive value of that is decent. The negative predictive value is probably really high. Like if that gene isn't closed and that protein is not being produced, that is probably not the right protein to target with a therapeutic intervention in that patient. But what's amazing is we have the ability now with the machine learning tools that are emerging very, very rapidly, to Dirk's earlier point, like more and more rapidly all the time. We have the ability now to relate those two things and to even impute missing data. Because if it could use histopath to predict what's happening in the attack, then you have a world where you're using a generic sort of potential biomarker tool to get to an incisive recommendation for a particular patient on the basis of their effectively genetic signature. So I've already said a lot, but those are my sort of general and specific comments on that. It's an exciting world.
Freddie?
Can I jump in and add to Mary's excellent points? Like those are a bunch of excellent points. The first one, though, I just want to reinforce that, data right now, I don't like the term omics so much, actually, because it makes you think of DNA sequence, proteins, and maybe metabolites or something like that. Data is so much broader than that. Mary alluded to one modality, which is images. So histopath is huge. It's where there's been so much advance of late. The other data stream, I'll give you an example just to I open my mind to certainly, but open people's minds. The J&J team did a really interesting experiment using machine learning methods on psychiatric questionnaires and found that they could relate response to a kappa opioid receptor agonist to a particular pattern on multiple questionnaires that seem to point at sort of the English word anhedonia, but it's not really anhedonia, it's a pattern in these questionnaires. So that's just something that is collected by a lot of psychiatrists that you could apply machine learning algorithm on top of to point towards a particular kind of medicine and a response, a responder analysis. So data, the omics thing seems to be too restrictive, is going to be my point. Data is all over the place and it can be really rich.
So to Rachel's question, I agree with everything that just got said, by the way, but I want everyone to hear ourselves. Population health is you've got this data and you've got this science and you're thinking about what you can do to somebody. to fix them or to help them. You have to have a consumer platform. Now, people talk about patient engagement. People are only patients about, well, they spend well under 1% of their life in clinical interactions or a clinical setting. So, Rachel, my answer to you would be the way you move from population health to getting to an individual person is you have to have the essential platform that's a consumer engagement and action platform that accompanies all of these other types of science and platforms that we have. Otherwise, you got a list of people that you're trying to do stuff to and wondering why it's not happening.
I think we also have to remember, and it was on the chat a little bit earlier, the role of the physician and training and teaching the physicians themselves, right? That's usually our first stop when we don't feel well. And I think it's critically important to have their engagement and their buy-in as to what their role is and how prevention and treatment need to work together.
Freddie, you're generating amazing amounts of data and protein information. What's your perspectives?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said on the panel, in that, data sets beyond genetic data, clinical genomic data sets, longitudinal data sets will be very important for inventing and developing, new medicines and improving the cost of care delivery. But I would also say, gosh, it's going to still be difficult to make that progress in 10 years across the board. I mean, I look back, almost a decade ago, I started at Foundation Medicine, where we were, building genetic data sets with the promise of precision medicine. And I think about, we started off building genomic-only data sets to help, guide therapy selection, and realized we actually needed clinical data. So we partnered with Flatiron and built the first clinical genomic data set, I believe in 2018, largely for lung cancer. And largely that data set was used to help guide clinical trial enrollment sites that we were, working with pharma partners on. And then we also had the vision that this would be used for regulatory support to do label expansion on oncology drugs. Fast forward now to 2023, a lot of that promise has not been realized because, again, even with a high quality data set with a company that's focused and a team that's focused on advancing cancer care, it's still there's more information needed. It's still very difficult to determine how patients will respond to drugs, even in oncology, right? You don't always get it right. HIV is a great example. But even in oncology, you can have a driver mutation. Well, guess what? They're resistance mechanisms. So I think, Paul, it's going to, certainly take, a variety of approaches in imaging-based tools. I agree that's something we're actually driving forward at Icon Therapeutics, is actually super resolution microscopy tools that allow us to look at individual proteins moving in live cells at scale to interrogate pathways with precision that's not been possible before. And I think, looking at additional tools that allow us to build complementary data sets. So again, we can approximate what's going on in a living system better. But again, I think even with that, it's going to be difficult to completely, change the cost curve, certainly in healthcare, certainly, in biotech, and then also just improve how we develop medicines for patients. So I do want to put a little bit of realism in this, like Jeff, I know we're all talking about the future, but gosh, I look back a decade ago when we were, building, 30 people in a room building Foundation Medicine. And I sort of think, we would be much further along. I thought we'd be much further along. And I think some of those challenges and just the quality of data, the amount of information, they're going to be significant. And I think partnerships that expand access to data sets will be even more and more important. That's something certainly we're looking at ICON.
So let's go to the 30,000-foot level. And I had 3 years of running a healthcare company 30 years ago and saw how basically dysfunctional and misaligned the structure of the industry was, and it doesn't seem to have changed much. My observation is almost every industry's going under some type of change through the digital transformation and such. But Janaki Akella asked a question: do you see the structure of the healthcare system, commercial payers and providers, fundamentally changing in the U.S.? And if so, would it go more towards the personal side, such as countries like India, or governmental driven, like UK and other countries? Anybody want to tackle that one? Structural change for the industry. Maria, you're the consultant, so you can speak more freely. What are your thoughts? Would you, if you could, would you change it with a magic wand? And if so, and do you think it's even realistic in today's world and today's politics?
I honestly don't. I don't have a good answer for that. It's not that we haven't been thinking about this, right? This is a very difficult and tricky question. Would I go to an independent payer, or would I go to a system? My suspicion is we're going to go to a hybrid model, that we probably will have some part of both. One of the things that's been rattling around in my head, and I'm deflecting the question here, is why is the debate always about the cost of drugs as opposed to the cost of general interventions? And I don't know how to tackle the broader question when the entire debate is focused on the mostly the cost of just that particular aspect.
Okay. Rachel?
No, I'm responding to Maria's comment there, right? I think, at least my impression, Maria, is that for so many consumers, for so many patients, their personal experience that is incredibly frustrating, incredibly convoluted. Very few people have the kinds of concerted, organized care that we've heard about as the great vision of what people should have access to. Most people don't have access to that. And the one pain point that they see every month, every week, every time is the copay or the out-of-pay cost for their drugs. You're right. If you actually zoom out and look at the broader picture, it's a drop in the bucket, and trying to fine-tune things there will have absolutely no impact on the broader ecosystem. And yet I think politically right now, that's a very popular tool simply because of how visible it is to patients. I mean, certainly I think we've seen tremendous response to the IRA, the small molecule penalty, and the many challenges that the industry is anticipating this will bring to bear in terms of the future of drug development. And personally, I think that's scary for the future of the biotech and pharma industries.
Ash, let me ask you, because you have experience from several different angles or seats on healthcare. What are your thoughts?
So I'm not sure I'm answering the initial question, but just building on the discussion, I would just say I do see a lot of movement towards spending out of pocket. I think consumer spending behaviors are changing, and that's not for necessarily chronic care and hospitalized payments. The insurance models will continue there, but there is increase in how much people are putting into their HSA, employer-sponsored amounts that are being attributed to where you can spend your dollars. I do see changes there, and maybe Amir can add to some of this. But I think when it comes to preventative medicine, primary health access, I think in the beginning it will be employer-sponsored, employers who are putting money into people's accounts. You will see a lot of consumer behavioral change where they're going to go for access over waiting and long wait times in a big healthcare system. So I think that change is happening. Specialty care, chronic care, I think is yet to be seen because that tends to be a lot more expensive, and we're going to have to see behavior changes, like I said earlier, from health plans on how that will drive those models. But I do see, I mean, we've talked about value-based care for a long time, but when there are increased costs, rubber meets the road. And I think we will see a lot of shift in that model where if the payments are rewarding outcomes and quality over fee for service, which will not happen, I think, in the next 1, 2, 3 years. It's like longer term when there's increasing, increasing burden. And I keep talking about Medicare because I do think that much of our reimbursements will be coming out of there. We will start to see more shift towards the chronic care population management and spend heading towards value-based care. But most of that today that impacts most of us is going to be in the preventative space. It's going to be before we become a patient, like Jeff said. And I think people who can't spend money out of pocket, generally employed people, will tend to go that route because of accessibility. So that's just, I don't know, Amir, if you're seeing this more. I had this conversation with Amazon when I was at Salesforce on this stuff, and I see you guys bringing it to the forefront here, and I do think it'll change. I think what the Amazon's doing, actually, I won't speak for you, is interesting that you're putting price transparency and bringing multiple providers to show transparency in price and accessibility. I do think it's an experiment. It's interesting. I'm curious to see where the future of that will take us, because that is out-of-pocket spend.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ash. Maybe to just follow on here, all these great points. Yeah, it's hard to have dramatic changes in our ecosystem because we have these political changes every few years. And so it's really hard to rewire a system under one administrative time period and then change it otherwise. So I think if you look within, for example, CMS, we've kind of been on a gradual, continuous trajectory of kind of more value-based care, at least in Medicare and Medicaid, which CMS has purview over, and it has less purview over the commercial world. And we're already in a mixed world of more than half of our spend is from governmental payers, Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial. So we're already in a hybrid model, which if one looks at other major countries around the world, they are as well. Most of the nationalized systems now have burgeoning private systems, and the more private systems have some nationalized components. So personally on that, I think it's probably more of the same, given all the stakeholders, given the challenges of making policy changes, given politics. But I do think, to Ash's points, I live in kind of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, so I see everything through that, and sometimes it's not how the world really works. But like the people here on this call, there's so much interesting innovation. There's so many interesting startups. I do see innovations in consumer-driven care and value-driven care and care in the home and remote monitoring. Obviously, all the various precision, personalized medicine, omics, all the topics we talked about today. And to Amazon, I think one of the interesting things about Amazon is it's not an incumbent in healthcare. This is why startups are interesting as well at some level. So I do think we can see new perspectives coming into healthcare. I mean, Amazon brings large reach, consumer reach, price transparency in general, choice, things that haven't really driven a lot of change at the consumer level. And I'm not sure we'll drive change at the cancer, cardiac, neuro, ortho level. But for example, we have a program that it's called RX Pass, where you can have all the meds you can eat for $5 a month. They're generics. So you don't have to run it through insurance, you can. And so you're seeing some movement here on PBMs and pricing. I think the rise of high deductibles and HSAs at some level, while people have called that consumer-driven care, at some level, it's making consumers make choices on the low-dollar care because you blow through your deductible and your lifetime max if you have cancer, cardiac, ortho, neuro conditions. And so at some level, those have maybe perversely made people make choices about, should I have that low cost test or that low cost script or that lower cost primary care? And low, I put in quotes, some of these may not be that low for everybody. And I do think we could see innovations there. Some of that's tax law. What's considered preventive care, pre-deductible, and HSA? That's actually tax law. It's hard to change because it's part of tax bills. So that's why that hasn't changed much. But I do think we can play around with those things. I think we're seeing some innovation in plan designs by employers, certainly in the Medicare space. We have a program where we're at full risk in Medicare risk programs, we're going to the home, right? And there's other such programs, and that's great care and it's saving money. So I think the short of this is, I think we'll see startups, we may see some large companies that haven't been in healthcare continue to enter it. I don't think that changes anything magically overnight. I still think we have the same kind of problem statements that I started off saying. But I also think we can't wait for the magic change. Plus or minus, we have the reimbursement system and the distribution system that we have. So how can we kind of be disruptive from within it? How can we innovate from within it? How can we think about new economic models, tech models, business models? And that's why I think the startup ecosystem is sometimes needed. I've worked in these great health systems. It's very hard to disrupt yourself when your whole ecosystem is built in a certain way on a certain model. It's very hard to do. So I guess my call here would be to continue to have a regulatory and ecosystem environment that supports innovation and trying new things. Because just whenever we think we have the answer and we'll centralize it and the great minds will figure it out, then we figure out that's wrong and the world shifts and technology shifts. Few reflections.
All right.
And I just, sorry, just one quick comment, not to end on not a negative note per se, but just to call out to say, you know, it's interesting to me because we continue to innovate and bring all of these new models of care, which improves accessibility and affordability, et cetera. But at the same time, we're expecting providers in, you know, whether it's in a health system or taking insurance to coordinate care and drive complex care. And I do think that's something we have to think about fixing in the next 5 years, or at least start having like real conversations around this, because you cannot provide personalized care. I think somebody said this earlier, without bringing the data to the people providing the front lines of care. There's just so much data coming at us when you're in a system trying to care for a chronic, you know, disease patient. And if they're seeing people out of pocket, it's like the age-old question of interoperability. I don't know who bears the burden at this point. Like there's so much data and there's so many different people providing care. It's really hard to coordinate. So I'm not, you know, I don't have an answer for this, but I do think it behooves all of us to really give this some thought, and anybody that can move the needle here really needs to like try. And maybe it's a regulatory issue and the government needs to take it up at this point, but I don't know how we are going to provide, you know, precision medicine to somebody if they don't have all of the data at hand in a way that's like simple and useful. I know for me, at least when I'm in clinic, it's really hard. I don't have all the data. It's usually the patient sort of recollecting things or bringing in, you know, pieces of paper to kind of show whatever it is that they've received on the outside, biopsy results, et cetera. So just to call out.
What you're going to see potentially in structural change is a buy-in capability where Medicare, instead of being age 65, people can start buying in around age 60 into what looks like Medicare Advantage plans today. I think that's going to be politically sustainable across the aisle. That's the only thing I see.
Okay. Well, we could continue this all day with a panel like this one. It is a complex system, and it affects all of us personally as well as professionally and for our organizations. So first of all, I just want to please join me in thanking each and every one of our panelists. They're amazing, but it also demonstrated, I mean, my head is spinning. The amount of intelligence, innovation, drive, and all these folks are leaders who are truly trying to lead towards a better outcome, better structure, better innovation. And it is such a complex system that functions together through collaboration and sharing of data. I do believe we're at an inflection point in history between the computational powers and the systems and the transformation that we have the opportunity to try to move forward. So thank you so much for joining us, sharing your knowledge, your experience, and also your questions about what needs to happen in the future.